Councilmember David O. Councilmember Helen Gim.
I am present. Good afternoon, colleagues.
Councilmember Curtis Jones Jr. Councilmember Brian O'Neill. Councilmember Cindy Bass. Councilmember Maria Quinones Sanchez.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Councilmember Mark Squilla.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and colleagues present.
And we are also joined by Councilmember Alan Dom today.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. How you doing, Rachel?
Thank you. Thank you all so much, colleagues, for your presence. A quorum of the committee is present, and this hearing is now called to order. This is the public hearing of the Committee on Law and Government regarding bill numbers 210073 and 210080 and resolution number 210085. Both bill number 200587 and resolution number 200605 are being held in committee at the request of the sponsor. Rachel, will you please read the title of the bills and resolutions?
Bill number 210073, an ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified electors of the City of Philadelphia of an amendment to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter, providing for expansion of the Board of License and Inspection Review as approved by resolution of the City Council, fixing the date of a special election for such purpose, prescribing the form of ballot question to be voted on, and authorizing the appropriate officers to publish notice and to make arrangements for the special election. 210085, a resolution proposing an amendment to the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter, providing for expansion of the Board of License and Inspection Review, and providing for the submission of the proposed amendment to the electors of Philadelphia. And 210080, an ordinance amending section 2610 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Statement of Financial Interests, by revising the required conditions and information for filing under certain terms and conditions.
Before we begin to hear testimony from witnesses we have for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for questions or comments they have for the witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. Rachel, before you call on the first panel for Bill 210073, I just want to make a few comments for the record. On February the 4th, I introduced legislation on behalf of the administration to expand the Board of License and Inspection Review. The plan is for a ballot question to go on the May 18th ballot. The charter change would expand the L&I Review Board from 6 members to 9 and would further allow the board chair to designate any 3 or more members of the board to hear and decide any case. This legislation has the aim of improving government efficiency. The L&I Review Board has been functioning with only 3 members for some time, pre-COVID. So they've needed all current members present in order to hold any hearings. And of course, my colleagues and I, we know what a challenge that can be when we are trying to get through committee hearings. If only 2 members show up, they cannot hear a case. And this has really made things challenging in terms of moving cases along, and the public hasn't been shy about communicating their frustration. Currently, the L&I Review Board is experiencing a major backlog of cases. The L&I Review Board hears cases related to L&I violations. When someone receives a violation, they have 30 days to file an appeal with the board if they disagree with the violation. The board also hears cases like gun permit denial appeals. The hope is that this legislation will allow the L&I Review Board to eliminate the backlog of cases and going forward to hear future cases in a timely manner. And because I just mentioned that it's been functioning with only 3 members, someone here is saying, but, wait a minute, it can be up to 6 members. We just need to fill those vacancies. Our goal is to get to 9 so that, for example, we could have 3 different committees all hearing cases, at the same time, and thus making it more efficient. And with that being said, Rachel, will you call the first panel that we have to testify this afternoon on bill number 210073 and resolution number 210085?
Kirk McLaren, Director of Administrative Services for the Department of Licenses and Inspections.
Good afternoon, Kurt. Are you connected and ready to proceed?
Yes, Councilmember Parker, I'm connected and ready.
Thank you. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Kirk McLaren, McClarren.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Parker and members of the Committee on Law and Government. My name is Kirk McLaren, and I am the Director of Administrative Services for the Department of Licenses and Inspections. I am here today with Michelle Rand, Board's Administrator for L&I. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of Bill number 210073 and Resolution number 210085 that seek to amend the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter for the expansion of the Board of License and Inspection Review. If approved by City Council, a ballot would be presented to the city voters in the May 2021 election. The Board of License and Inspection Review is responsible for hearing several types of cases. First, the board hears appeals of property violations issued by L&I and other city agencies. Second, the board affirms or alters property violation decisions issued by L&I or other city agencies. Lastly, the board hears appeals for licenses to carry firearms and firearm license revocations. Currently, the charter allows for a maximum of 6 members to be appointed to the board. In order to conduct a hearing, at least 3 members must be present. This proposed legislation would make 2 important changes. It would allow for a maximum of 9 members to be appointed to the board, and it would permit cases to be heard in panels of not less than 3 board members. This means that multiple panels would be able to hear cases simultaneously. The Board of License and Inspection Review currently has a significant backlog of cases that are waiting to be heard. Prior to March 2020, the Board of License and Inspection Review conducted all of their hearings in person. When the pandemic hit, the department pivoted to conducting virtual hearings via Zoom. This change took some time, which only added to the existing backlog of cases to be heard by the board. The proposed expansion of the Board of License and Inspection Review is crucial to ensure that all appeals are heard in a timely manner. Thank you for the opportunity to provide the department's testimony. We are happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. McLaren. And let me just make sure that I have this accurate. I said 3, but is it true that now you have 4 members? Are there 4 members now?
I'm going to defer to Michelle Rand, our board's administrator. Michelle, that is correct that we now have a 4th, right?
That is, and the 4th member was appointed in February of 2020. So basically, we were operating with 3 until then, and we got our 4th member, and then we shut down the next month.
Okay, got it. So 4, but nevertheless, that need for a quorum still persists, correct?
That is correct.
All righty, the chair recognizes Vice Chair Green for comments and questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is a great opportunity to expand this important board. As you stated earlier in your open comments, that getting a quorum is at times challenging when you have a board that has a small number of people. I know from my experience as an attorney, when working with boards in a pro bono capacity, and they're saying, well, how many board members should we have? We're often saying you should have 9 or 11 or 13 in case you don't have all the numbers that you need in order to operate. The question I have is that as this legislation moves forward, can you give a perspective of when you will really be able to operationalize this at a capacity to get rid of some of the backlog that the chair talked about?
Michelle, do you want to answer that?
Sure. Well, I believe that with this measure, if it does pass, it would give us a lot more flexibility, but we would need additional members to be appointed. So should it pass and we can do 3-member panels, our eventual goal is to have multiple panels running because currently we can only have 1. I would need, however, to go from 4 to 6 to have 2 panels working and to 9, obviously, to have 3. Or at the very least enough alternates to have 2 solid panels working every single week.
Okay. And assuming if the legislation was in effect as of right now, could you give a perspective on what type of timeline would what type of timeline would occur that would reduce the backlog?
Well, the more panels I have, the more I can hear as far as cases goes. I could double what I'm currently hearing. Right now, if I had that second panel, we have 1 hearing per week. I would like to increase that to 2. 3 would be great if I could get 3 panels. And right now, because we are hearing things from Zoom, we can have less cases than we can normally hear in person. There are connectivity issues. We also have to go through with our clients to see if they have the ability to connect to a Zoom hearing. But we could, what I want to do is, as soon as we have more members, just go right into increasing it. We're prepared to go right ahead once we have enough members to form the 2 panels or 3 panels. And, we have the cases, so we're anxious to double or triple our current capacity.
And so you said you currently do about 1 case per week. Generally, prior to the pandemic, how many cases were you averaging on a weekly basis with the same number? And also, how many cases were you doing per year compared to the cases that are being filed?
Well, we were in-person hearings, and we alternate. So 1 week is firearms hearings, and the next week is code violations. For firearms, we were doing, when we had in-person hearings, 28 cases per hearing. And for codes, we were doing 40 to 45. Now that we have Zoom, because the cases take longer to hear, and because we also have to give all of the appellants a choice at the beginning on the record to have that Zoom hearing, or do they want to wait to in-person hearings, we can hear 12 to 15 cases at each hearing instead of 28 or 45. So the backlog is just getting bigger as we move along.
And we'll continue to grow because of the challenges of having as many cases based on Zoom, and we'll probably be in this type of dynamics for some period of time. So having a expanded board will definitely help. Will not fully eliminate the backlog initially, will definitely help you to get through more cases, both on the gun permit as well as the other L9 issues.
Correct. I would need an expanded board at this moment just to get back to the amount of cases I was hearing in person as opposed to working virtually.
Gotcha. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Green. Those are really good questions. So we could quantify, what was the workload before and where we are now. So thank you for those questions. Chair recognizes Councilmember Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to recognize that I know that Deputy Mayor Rich Laser has called me from time to time about appointments to this board. It's such an important board. It's an appeal process. And I too had questions along the line of Councilmember Green around how are we ensuring access, language capabilities, and with more members, how are we going to make sure we have kind of the diversity of thought? This appeal board could be pretty intimidating for the people that come in front of it. So with the technology, what are some of the things you're looking to do, particularly as you bring on new members, to ensure you have that diversity of thought in that decision-making process?
Yeah, thank you, Council Member Sanchez. The board has always followed city protocol in terms of language access, but I would like for Michelle to explain a little bit in more detail about how we do that, and to kind of go into more detail about what we are looking for to ensure diversity of thought in new appointments. Michelle, do you want to touch on that?
Certainly. So right now we work with appellants when they file to see if they do need language services. We do order in-person interpreters. When we do Zoom hearings, we have that interpreter obviously Zoom in. We give them an invite for that. Nobody, if they're uncomfortable, is forced to go ahead, because sometimes we don't always know there's a language barrier. If someone shows up to the hearing and they're uncomfortable, they will be continued to another date when we can get an interpreter. The board is very aware, and they want to make sure that everyone gets their due process and is comfortable with the hearing and the situation moving forward. As far as future members, I feel like right now, diversity is always better. And I feel that, the membership that we have, now is very good. I would like to see, just more varied in different professions, and different cultural makeups. The more the better, I feel.
Thank you. Again, these are one of those intimidating processes that should be simple for folks, but you all know you've worked in that. And I just feel like that's it's a board we don't always hear about. I was chair of LNI, so I know about it. It's so many people come in front of it. And it's one of the places where people are either very happy that we got them through or very upset because they don't feel like they got through process. You really don't have any room in the middle for that. But thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair, for this. I think this is a great idea. I do think in this new Zoom reality, the more hands on deck, the better. Lastly, is this a paying board?
Yes. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Michelle. I'm sorry.
It is $85 per session.
Okay. No one's going to be rich out of that. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Hey, Councilmember Sanchez, when Michelle said that $85, I started thinking about the 28 cases regarding firearms appeals, and then those 40 to 45 code violation appeals that she answered in response to Councilmember Green. So you're right. We won't expect anybody to be getting rich from this. But I do just want to state for the record, for your benefit, Kurt and Michelle, both Councilmember Green and Councilmember Sanchez asked really good questions. And you know that, once we work very hard to see this legislation shepherded through the council so that you all can increase your effectiveness and efficiency, that, racial equity lens, that we are always, talking about here in the city. We need to make sure that it's reflected in the membership of the board. I'm thinking about our neighborhood small businesses. So Councilmember Sanchez, those are the people who I usually hear from who are sometimes not happy with the with the outcome. So that's extremely important. And Deputy Mayor Rich Laser, he has been Johnny on the spot in my communication with him about this issue, and has affirmed that he understands that same need. But I thank Council members Green and Sanchez for helping us to get that on the record. And now the chair wants to recognize Council Member Gim for comments and questions.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I also want to thank both of you for the hard work during these difficult times. I support this bill. I think it's very important. One question that I had was whether members are trained in the use of language line. So following up on Councilmember Quinones Sanchez's question.
We do actually use the language line. We usually get in-person interpreters over the language line. The language line itself, we use as a last resort. We find that it is a much better service to have an in-person interpreter, both for the client that is there for the hearing, and also for any connection problems that could happen technically. So we actually go first to the in-person interpreter.
So what languages do you cover in person?
Any language you want. We've had everything from Pashto, we get Spanish, we get, we've had Ukrainian, we've had Russian, we have had Chinese Mandarin.
Ms. Wren, could I just interrupt you here? So I'm trying to get a little bit of clarity. So I assume these people have to be requested ahead of time, or they're not on staff, are they?
No, they're not. We do request the interpreter ahead of time.
And so somebody would have to affirmatively make that request, and then that interpreter would be provided. And then if somebody showed up who did not have an interpreter, then you would have language line. Is that correct?
Yes, we could go to language line. We would also offer the person an opportunity to have an in-person interpreter and continue their case to another day.
Okay. And usually how do they, how would they request it? So at the time of the hearing scheduling, is there a notification that you can make a language request? How is that actually done?
Well, usually when we were open to the public, people would file in person. And when they would come to us, they would request an interpreter, or we would find a very polite way of asking if we thought that somebody might need. We have to be sensitive to that. We would ask someone, do you want an interpreter there? So we would ask them directly. Sometimes people will tell us. Sometimes when they come to file with someone with them to help interpreting, then we would say, we are actually required to have an official interpreter. You're not allowed to bring like a friend or a family member to interpret for you. We have to have an official city interpreter. So at that point, we would offer the service. It's been more of a challenge, obviously, since people are filing online now.
Right.
But people, will sometimes inform us ahead of time. But again, and sometimes people, when we had in-person hearings, they would arrive there and realize, I can get an interpreter. And then once they ask for one, they get automatically continued. So
and is online.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Does the online filing allow for an interpretation box? Is there a box on the online file that says, I request an interpreter for a hearing?
I would have to check that. I'm not sure.
Could you check, and would it be difficult to add if it's not currently there?
I would ask Mr. McLaren about that. That's something we could get added.
Yes, absolutely, Councilmember Gim. We are continually enhancing the Eclipse software since it's still relatively new, and we can check on that right away. And if it isn't already incorporated, I don't see that being difficult to add. But regardless of what it takes, we will make sure.
That's helpful. I know many immigrant communities need to know more about the city laws and rules, and certainly as they're being, as they are being informed and also sometimes held accountable for the city laws and rules, we just want to make sure that the communication is clear and that they have an opportunity for that. I'm just going to add my, reiteration of what Councilmember Quinones Sanchez and Parker had said is that, for us, for me and for, I think, our whole city council body, diversity, racial diversity in particular, is not just about appearances or how things look. It is a fundamental alteration in how city services are both conveyed, understood by our boards. And so I do want to underscore with both the testifiers that we do take a serious look at the diversity of the board, because we believe that our board is stronger when it reflects the experiences and the collective experiences of people. And sometimes it's extraordinarily difficult for those of us in government to understand how hard it is to access government and how alienating it can be. And so we really want a board that understands that the breadth of our populace is broad, and our city government needs to reflect that, and it actually makes us better at our jobs. So I want to thank the council chair for allowing me those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member again, and Councilwoman. Thank you, Council Member. Thank you so very much for just adding your voice relative to the diversity and inclusion in particular, along with the language access. Extremely important, and in all things that we do, we should make sure that we keep those issues front and center. So thank you, Council Member Gim. At this time, I just want to ask if there are any other questions or comments from members of the committee. Is there anyone else here to testify on the bill and resolution whose name has not been called yet? Hearing none, Rachel, will you please call the first panel that we have here to testify this afternoon on bill number 21080. But prior to doing that, Rachel, I do want to acknowledge Councilmember Green, who wanted to give some opening comments relative to bill number 21080. Chair recognizes Councilmember Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say a few comments regarding this piece of legislation regarding financial disclosure. Prior to this hearing, my staff circulated to all members of council kind of a summary of this legislation. I want to thank Sarah Stevenson, the city's chief integrity officer, as well as Michael Cook, general counsel for our ethics board, for their collaboration on this legislation. This legislation seeks to, and I think the appropriate phrase is right size, some of the people that need to file as part of our statement of financial interest and disclosure laws for the city of Philadelphia. Currently, those who serve on advisory boards and commissions are required to submit this information. I think this puts a limiting effect on those who may want to participate and be more engaged in the city of Philadelphia on activities and engagement that are city boards and commissions. And we don't necessarily need to have that type of level of information for them to participate. And I think it does provide a chilling effect on those who may have an interest and have some concerns or challenges in providing that type of level of disclosure if they're just in an advisory capacity. However, those that serve on boards and commissions that have substantial and significant impact on our city, they still would be required to submit statements of financial interest. It also broadens those who are in the executive branch who prior to this legislation, if passed, had not had or not required to file a statement of financial interest, and does require them to do so going forward. So I think it provides the level of transparency, and I think, as I said earlier, tries to right size who should be submitting information that can allow greater transparency for the public. In addition, It also, based on this legislation, makes some other changes on the contents of disclosure of information, and also modernizes our current legislation by mandating online publication of filed forms. I think from that perspective, it does add a level of transparency to make sure that we are providing the public with the information they need regarding those who are involved in our civic affairs as a city, but also not needlessly burdening and putting a limiting effect on those who want to participate but are merely serving an advisory capacity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Green, and the committee wants to definitely, for the record, thank you, Councilmember Green, and members of your staff for all of the work that you did in regards to this issue. With that being said, Ray, will you please call the first panel scheduled to testify on bill number 210080?
Michael Cook, General Counsel for the Philadelphia Board of Ethics, and Sarah Stevenson, Chief Integrity Officer for the City of Philadelphia.
Thank you both, Michael and Sarah, for being here. I want you to feel free to please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. Sarah, we can start with you or Michael. Sarah, we can start with you. That's fine.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Look, I can hear you well. And Sarah, I'm starting with you because your picture is larger on my screen, right? so that's why I'll start with you. Yeah, state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
That works. Thank you, Chairperson Parker. Sarah Stevenson, Sarah with an H, Stevenson with a V. Good afternoon, Chairperson Parker, Vice Chair Green, and members of the Committee on Law and Government. I am Sarah Stevenson, Chief Integrity Officer for the City of Philadelphia. I'm here today to testify in support of Bill number 210080, which amends Section 2610 of City Code. I think the council member said it right. I think this bill would right-size the population of who in government is required to file the city statement of financial interest, also referred to in the short form as the city form. You'll hear me and Michael as well refer to this as city form. The bill increases the number of executive branch leaders who are required to file the city form, and this expanded transparency keeps city leaders to account. Simultaneously, the amendment reduces barriers to public participation in government by eliminating the current filing obligation for advisory board and commission members. This is incredibly important as we as a government and a society need to include more voices in our decision making. Members of boards and commissions that exercise significant powers of government, that's a key phrase, would still be obligated to file the city form. This makes sense because although these boards and commissions are often comprised of non-city employees, these boards and commissions can carry government authority over residents and businesses. The administration also supports the substantive changes to the contents of the disclosure and the online publication of the filed forms. While the administration largely does this already, it's important to formally expand public access to the disclosures. We respectfully request that this bill be approved by this committee today and the full council as quickly as possible so the immediately effective changes can be incorporated into this year's filing season and communicated to the affected filers as soon as possible. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Michael?
Good afternoon, Chair Parker and Vice Chair Green, other members of the committee. My name is Michael Cook, that's C-O-O-K-E. I'm the General Counsel for the Philadelphia Board of Ethics. Thank you for giving me the opportunity today to speak on this legislation, which would update the requirements in the Ethics Code for certain city officers and employees who require to file an annual statement of financial interest, the city form, as Chief Integrity Officer Stephen alluded to. I'm here today on behalf of the board and at their direction to testify in support of this legislation. And note that we had the opportunity to confer with both Councilmember Green and his staff and the administration about the bill, and we appreciate their willingness to consider our thoughts and suggestions for what we believe will be an improvement to the existing ordinance. In my written testimony, I gave some summary of what the legislation would do. Both Councilmember Green and Ms. Stevenson have already done that, so I won't do it again. Let's say I agree with their description and their expression of the benefits of these changes. So, the different types of changes regarding who has to file and the information required as they described it. And then, of course, that other very important component to make it the requirement that these filings would be made publicly available online. The board, of course, supports that as well. And so just to wrap up with what I had to say, the board supports this legislation, thinks it's a notable improvement, and especially in light of the fact that this part of the ordinance has not been updated since 1984. It's a different world than we were in 1984. And so it probably seems like a good time for an update to the rules. And with that, I'll conclude my testimony. And of course, I'm very happy to answer any questions committee members may have.
Thank you again, Sarah and Michael. Thank you both so very much for your testimony. Chair recognizes Vice Chair Green for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ms. Stevenson and Mr. Cook. Thank you for your testimony and your collaboration on this legislation. And just have a few quick questions in reference to the mandating of the publication online of various documents. Can you give us some perspective on what that cost may be? I'm not sure you've had a chance to evaluate that. I know technology has been a challenge for the Ethics Board for some years, just because of the limited resources they have to try to modernize and provide the information and the access to information that people have been looking for to get documentation. But if you can provide some type of perspective on if this legislation were to pass, mandating this requirement of publication, what the cost may be and what the timeline would be for implementation.
Certainly, Council Member, I will speak to that, and then, of course, would defer to Ms. Stevenson if she has something that she wants to add. From the board's perspective, we were very pleased that about a year ago, working with OIT and the administration, and the records department, were able to upgrade the system for filing these statements, both the city form and the state form, and the existing form required by Mayor's executive order, to do all that online, to make it a much simpler and a much more easy to use system. So it's good timing in the sense that there's been a whole modernization and overhaul of the filing system. In addition to that, the records department is already posting not all, but a number of the forms online. So they have an infrastructure in place that they would be able to use. And my understanding from conversations with Commissioner Leonard is that there would not be any significant expenditure in order to post all of the forms online. He was not concerned that he felt confident that they would be able to do it within their existing budget, is my recollection of that conversation.
Yeah, just quickly, I would concur with that. I don't think that it's there's going to be a major cost to posting these online. As I mentioned earlier, the administration records department is largely already doing this already.
And just one other question, Ms. Stevenson, you talked about right-sizing the legislation in reference to the universe. I made comments in that regard, and I agree with you to making sure that those in the executive branch who in the past have not had to file this information are now required, and those who are in just merely advisory positions would not have to file a statement of financial interest going forward. But I also want to talk about the other aspect of this legislation, which Mr. Cook just referenced, the fact that this legislation has not been updated since 1984. So not only does it right size, but also modernizes things to a current perspective. For example, it's my understanding that if you are a filer under our laws and if this legislation is passed and you receive items from the city, those would not have to be disclosed as gifts going forward. So it also modernizes the perspective of how we as a city operates for those who are filers, that if you are someone that is part of the city infrastructure and you receive something from the city, that's not going to be considered a gift and based on this legislation. So I think the modernization is very important, and I just want to get some perspective on what was the motivation on making these changes. Was it to make us similar to other jurisdictions around the country that have similar legislation regarding what's considered a gift?
So I will start. Unfortunately, I don't know if it was me or the system. Some of your question was cut out a little bit, but I'll attempt to respond from what I heard. So the section of the amendment addressing gifts, the main change there would be that if a filer who is an elected official who receives tickets from the city, like the Dell, for example, and if you meet some qualifications in there, you would not have to disclose that on your filing. So that's the major change. I will defer to Michael on any additional comments related to the changes around the gift portion of the bill.
Thank you, Sarah. So I concur the way that the legislation is written. It says that a filer need not disclose any tickets received from the city. The reason it's limited to tickets for that exception is because, from our understanding, that is by far the most common, if not really the only thing that city employees receive that could be described as gifts that come from the city. There's other things we get in the course of our jobs, but it's either our salary or it's things to enable to do our jobs. And I do believe that is consistent with other jurisdictions, although I haven't done a survey of them on this particular question, but certainly think that it's something to your point about the modernization and the experience having shown us that it's not really helpful disclosure to the public for some city official to be listing Dell tickets as gifts they received, especially if it's if it would be required for an elected official where they're getting a block of them that they're handing out to people. It sort of makes it look like a more meaningful a transaction is happening than actually is.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Green. And the chair wants to recognize the presence of Councilwoman Member Cindy Bass. Thank you, Council Member, for your presence. Is there anyone else here who has any questions from this committee and or for this panel? Is there anyone else who is here to testify on the bill whose name has not yet been called? Okay, listen, we want to thank you both so much for your presence here today. I will ask one last time, are there any final questions or comments from members of the committee? Okay, hearing none, there being no further questions from members of the committee and no other witnesses to testify, I will ask if there is anyone present in this hearing whose name we have failed to call that wishes to offer testimony on any of the bills or resolutions being considered today. All right. Hearing none, we want to thank each and every one of you for testifying, all of the panels and the witnesses for their participation today. We value your opinions. I now invite all panels and witnesses to please disconnect from the meeting before we go into our public meeting. And we will pause now very, very briefly the proceedings as multiple participants leave the hearing. Thank you all again. With that being said, this concludes the public hearing of the committee. We will now go into a public meeting to consider the action to be taken on the bills before this committee today. We will now convene the public meeting. Rachel, will you please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance will please indicate that you are present when your name is called. Also, again, just please say a few words when responding so that your image will be displayed on the screen when you speak.
Vice Chair Derek Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looking forward to wrapping up this hearing.
Councilman David O.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and colleagues, for a very informative hearing.
Councilwoman Helen Gim.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and colleagues. I am present.
Councilmember Curtis Jones Jr. Councilmember Brian O'Neill. Councilmember Cindy Bass.
I am present. Thank you.
Councilmember Maria Quinones Sanchez.
Good afternoon, and thank you for an efficient hearing.
Councilmember Mark Squilla.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and colleagues. Looking forward to the vote.
And I believe I'm not sure if Councilmember Alan Dom is still with us or not. But.
Okay, thank you so very much, Rachel. We will now go into our public meeting, and the chair recognizes Council Member and Vice Chair Green for a motion on Bill number 210073.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for such a expedited and expeditious hearing. I move that Bill number 210073 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council.
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Councilmember Quinones Sanchez seconded the motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that Bill number 210073 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. The chair recognizes Council Member and Vice Chairman Green for a motion on resolution number 210085.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that resolution number 210085 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation.
Second.
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Council Member O seconded that motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that resolution number 210085 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. The chair recognizes Councilmember Green for a motion on Bill number 210080.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that Bill number 210080 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council.
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Councilmember Quinones Sanchez seconded the motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that Bill number 210080 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. This concludes the business before the Committee on Law and Government today. And before we conclude, I want to ask any of my colleagues if they have any closing remarks that they wanted to get on the record. Hearing none, want to thank you all so very much for your attendance. And Vice Chair and Councilmember Green, I want to thank you for being on standby just in case I was a technical catastrophe here today, but we made it through the meeting with the new Squilla. You know, I'm a technical dinosaur, so Derek was like right on key just in case I screwed anything up or got disconnected. So thank you, Councilmember.
You did great. You did great.
Our new reality.
Yeah, tell me about it. Thank you all so much, and we'll be seeing each other soon. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, take care.
All right.